In my serene, almost forgotten town, cradled by the embrace of ancient forests and meandering trails long abandoned, my existence was a portrait of seclusion. Days melded into one another, marked by the comforting monotony of routine. The outer world, with its cacophony and clamor, seldom beckoned, and the locals often whispered about the solitary figure who found solace in the silent company of books and the whispered secrets of nature rather than the bustling society that thrived beyond my doorstep. This isolation was not a burden but a choice, a sanctuary where peace was not just a concept, but a living, breathing companion. At least, that was the case until the tranquility of my existence was shattered by something as innocuous as an itch. This irritation made its debut on my forearm, not with a bang, but a whisper. A small, innocuous patch of skin that was slightly raised, reddened, and itched with an intensity that belied its appearance. Initially dismissed as a mere insect bite, an everyday annoyance that would soon fade into the background of my life, it instead chose to burgeon both in size and discomfort. Lotions and creams, once thought to be panaceas for such trivial ailments, offered nothing more than fleeting relief, a mere pause in the growing storm of unease. The real harbinger of my descent into obsession was the appearance of fibers. Emerging from the epicenter of my irritation, these tiny, thread-like strands were a spectacle of vibrant colors that caught and played with the light in ways that seemed almost unnatural. When I attempted to pluck one from my skin, expecting it to yield to my efforts and offer some form of relief, it remained steadfast, anchored within me as if it had found a home. The sensation wasn't painful, but was profoundly disturbing, a stark reminder that something unknown and unwelcome had made its presence known within the confines of my own body. Driven by a growing desperation, I turned to the digital expanse of the internet, sifting through forums and medical sites in a voracious quest for answers. Yet, this search was fruitless. No condition documented in the vast annals of medical literature matched the aberration I witnessed in my own reflection. Day by day, what had started as a mild irritation evolved into a consuming obsession. I watched, fascinated and horrified in equal measure, as the fibers proliferated, morphing and changing in response to my touch, retreating momentarily only to advance once more in their silent conquest of my flesh. The night turned into a battleground, sleep a coveted prize that remained ever out of reach. The sensation of unseen entities crawling beneath my skin, the softest whisper of movement in places where stillness should reign, transformed my nights into a waking nightmare. In this affliction, I found myself truly alone, isolated not just by my physical distance from society, but by the nature of my condition. The thought of seeking medical intervention flickered through my mind, only to be extinguished by the fear of disbelief, of ridicule, of being cast aside as a victim of an overactive imagination. Thus, I chose to suffer in silence, documenting each new development with a fervor that bordered on fanaticism. My camera became my confidant, capturing images of my condition that were as undeniable as they were incomprehensible. The once minor irritation had now expanded, unfurling across my skin in a network of redness and fibers, each day creeping closer to the crook of my elbow with relentless, inexorable intent. It was during one of my forays into the depths of the local library's most neglected shelves that I discovered a tome that seemed as ancient as time itself. Its pages were filled with tales of unexplained conditions, of afflictions that mirrored the nightmare etched upon my own skin. Yet, this discovery offered no solace, no balm for my growing fear. Instead, it served only to deepen the dread of what lay ahead. As the days melded into nights, and the nights back into days, my psychological state began to fray at the edges. The constant presence of the fibers, their relentless growth, and the inability to find answers or solace in the world around me, pushed me further into a well of isolation I had once found comforting. Now, it felt like a prison. My interactions with the outside world dwindled to non-existence. Phone calls went unanswered, emails unread. The thought of someone seeing the affliction that had claimed my arm, of reading the confusion and horror in their eyes, was unbearable. I could not face the judgment, the whispered theories about my sanity, or the pity. I was trapped in a cycle of avoidance, where every potential solution was overshadowed by an overwhelming fear of exposure. I began to question my own mind. Sleep deprivation painted the world in surreal strokes, blurring the line between wakefulness and dreams. Shadows in my home seemed to move with a purpose, whispering secrets I strained to hear but never understood. I wondered if the fibers were not just altering my physical form, but my perception of reality as well. The solitude I once cherished became my tormentor. Conversations with myself filled the silence. Debates over the nature of my condition. Was it physical, a disease unseen by modern medicine? Or was it a manifestation of a mind unraveling, a tangible product of psychological breakdown? These debates offered no answers, only further entrenchment into my isolation. In a desperate bid for clarity, I turned my home into a sanctuary and a laboratory. Every mirror reflected the progression of the fibers, now a constant reminder of my transformation. I documented everything with a meticulousness born of obsession, each photograph, each note a testament to my descent. Yet, in this isolation, I found a perverse form of freedom. Unbound by the expectations of normalcy, I delved deeper into research, into ancient texts and modern anomalies, searching for any clue that might explain my condition. I experimented with remedies, both scientific and arcane, each failure driving me deeper into despair but also fueling a stubborn determination to uncover the truth. My home, a mess of scattered notes, grotesque photographs, and failed remedies, bore witness to my unending obsession. The once orderly space was now a physical manifestation of my fractured mind, with every surface telling the tale of a man who had been consumed by an invisible enemy. The internet, once a beacon of hope in my quest for answers, had transformed into an echo chamber of theories, each more fantastical and desperate than the last. Morgellons, alien parasites, government experiments, each hypothesis spiraled into the next, leaving me drowning in a sea of conjecture and fear. Isolation had become my only reality. Friends and family, unable to breach the fortress of paranoia I had erected, receded into the shadows of my life. Their voices, once familiar and comforting, now sounded distant and alien, as if they belonged to another life, another person entirely. I found myself speaking aloud, not to them, but to the fibers, demanding answers they would never give. My reflection, once a familiar anchor, had become unrecognizable. The face in the mirror marred by lesions and the iridescent threads that emerged from my skin like grotesque flowers blooming in fast forward. Sleep had abandoned me completely, leaving in its wake a perpetual state of limbo where hallucinations and reality danced together indistinguishably. Shadows moved with intent, whispering secrets in a language that felt on the cusp of comprehension. I began to see patterns in the chaos, a hidden order to the madness that consumed me. The fibers, I was convinced, were a key to unlocking these secrets, a map written in the language of my own DNA. In a final bid for clarity, I turned my focus inward, delving into the depths of my own psyche. The distinction between investigator and subject blurred as I subjected myself to experiments of a nature so personal and invasive that they left me hovering on the brink of physical and mental collapse. I documented each step with a meticulousness that bordered on the obsessive, convinced that if I could just find the pattern, the key to understanding, I could reclaim my life from the abyss. But the deeper I delved, the further I strayed from the light of sanity. The police were alerted by a neighbor, whose worry had grown in the wake of the man's prolonged and conspicuous absence. This neighbor, long accustomed to the quiet but predictable comings and goings, could no longer ignore the unsettling stillness that had settled over the once lively home. When the officers arrived, they were met with a tableau so perplexing and disconcerting that it defied any straightforward explanation. The interior of the house, A chaotic amalgamation of obsession and despair bore the marks of a mind in turmoil. The details of their discovery that night, mired in a fog of pain and frantic action, remain obscured, a series of events too surreal to be fully comprehended or articulated. In the sterile, impersonal confines of a hospital room, he found himself suspended in a liminal space between the consequences of his past actions and the uncertain prospect of recovery. As the initial shock of his situation gave way to a painful clarity, he was forced to confront the reality of what he had done to himself. The fibers, those enigmatic and consuming entities that had once dominated his every thought and action, now seemed almost inconsequential against the backdrop of his self-inflicted wounds. His body and psyche, both bearing the indelible marks of his ordeal, served as a stark testament to the dangers of his obsessions. His search for understanding, for some shred of meaning in the madness that had overtaken his life, had not culminated in the enlightenment he had so desperately craved, but rather to the edge of utter self-destruction.